Mumilaaq Qaqqaq joins me now from Ottawa. Mumilaaq Qaqqaq, welcome to the show.
Thanks, David, for having me.
So you want Justice Minister David Lametti to appoint an independent prosecutor. How do you see something like that working?
I think that there clearly needs to be a separation from several institutions like the federal and RCMP institution, and therefore we need to see a independent prosecutor available so that these crimes across Canada can be looked into without a fogginess or a
bias?
I'm trying
Is that
to
what you're
think of
worried
the
about?
term. Yeah, the bias. Thanks for that. A bias or a certain kind of lens to ensure that we are getting the full and truthful picture here.
Does it need to be a special independent prosecutor, or could it be something like a judge-led inquiry that had subpoena power that could be used to sort of try to bring evidence to light?
I think we've seen a number of things be attempted throughout Canada, and I think that what we have seen has allowed the Canadian institution to drag their feet for far too long to bring these kinds of truths to light, and that we need a sole position that can look into these horrific acts that have happened in the past and for many decades throughout Canada.
We've reached out to the Justice Department, to Minister Lametti's office, to ask about this, and essentially the response was that the Minister of Justice does not have the authority to initiate criminal investigations, that this is the exclusive power of the police. And they've repeated what the Prime Minister has said, that they're open to something that will allow survivors in their communities and the country to move forward on this. But the argument seems to be that they do not believe they have the power to appoint the type of prosecutor you're looking for. What's your response?
That's completely untrue. That is a complete lie to the rest of Canada, and a complete showing us again and again through this Liberal government the complete unwillingness to do the right thing. David Lametti 100% has the power to appoint this position, and the Justice Department can do that. And to say that this is onto the RCMP and the responsibility of them is another famous Liberal tactic of putting this on their responsibility onto someone else.
Do you know under what legal authority they could do this? Because we spoke to Errol Mendez, who's a University of Ottawa law professor, and he makes the point too that just the way the system works, there needs to be some sort of an independent police investigation first before you can get to the appointment of a prosecutor stage. So how mechanically do you see this working when the Justice Department and law professors say right now?
You know what, David? I hope that Canadians can see that everybody that should be holding some sort of responsibility and accountability is not, and typically lying through their teeth. When we saw things happen throughout Canada and Canadians get upset about the recent discovering, we have been seeing things moving. We have been seeing more things come to light. And for these statements to continuously being made about how they can't do something, it just continuously shows us that Indigenous lives do not matter and have not mattered to this federal institution ever.
Is there a way, because I think at the heart of what you're calling for here is accountability, right? Like we've had truth and reconciliation, but we've not really had accountability for a lot of the historic crimes that have led to the intergenerational trauma, the loss of life, the sexual abuse of young children. Is there a way to do that? I mean, could it be, I guess the RCMP, it's a fraught option for you, right? Because of the historic role they've played in the residential school system. But is it a special investigations unit if they can't jump right to a special prosecutors unit? I just wonder if there's another mechanism to achieve the same goal that you're hoping to achieve here.
I think there's some important things to clarify first. We can't get to reconciliation until we achieve truth and get through that truth into justice, and then we can start looking at reconciliation. Reconciliation is a buzzword that the Liberal government has loved to use throughout the number of years, but we haven't even got to truth because we know there are still hundreds, if not thousands, of Indigenous bodies in graves on residential school sites, boarding schools, sanatoriums, among a number of other places throughout Canada where Indigenous people were purposely put in positions to be attempted to be assimilated into a society that doesn't work for Indigenous peoples. And we continue to see those things play out. So I don't think we can talk about any sense of reconciliation or justice until we see truth. And we're not seeing truth because we're still seeing Lametti say that he can't do something he clearly can do.
You keep saying that, though. I wonder where in the legal framework of the country do you see the mechanism for him to do this? I wonder if you can explain this to me, because you and Mr. Angus made this call today. And so we checked with an expert and we checked with the Justice Department. They say they can't. You say they can. How is it you believe that they can?
Right. And there are a whole bunch of numbers and legal things that I can get into. And this whole definition I can read out to you and can very well send and whatnot. It's there. It's in the framework. And I understand what you're asking. It's just I wouldn't have the time to actually read out the section 2.7 of da 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 that says the Attorney General does have that power.
Okay, so have you been able to speak to Minister Lametti about this and get a meeting with him to discuss options? I mean, because I know we've heard from the government, and I know you say that it's a lot of words and not a lot of action, that they're open to this, but they want a process to be led by the communities. I mean, have you talked to Mr. Lametti, and what do you take from this assurance from the government that they want a community-led process on next steps?
I mean, I haven't talked to Mr. Lametti yet. The press conference barely happened 6 hours ago, and we've been flooded with media requests and such. But in saying that, I think that Canada has come to more of an awareness and more of a light. And I think that there is more of a want to do the right thing and to do better. And that's what the federal institution is here to do. That's what the Canadian government is supposed to do, is help the betterment of lives of Canadians. Do we see that happen? No. Are we seeing justice being fulfilled? No. Are we seeing exercises that can be played out being used? No. Are we seeing justice fulfilled? No. Reconciliation? Absolutely not. What we're talking about is just being able to get to that truth piece before we can even talk about reconciliation. I'm talking about ensuring that these brown bodies in the ground are found and brought home, and that there is a responsibility from the Canadian government to ensure that that happens, and they are failing that, and they have that responsibility to fulfill that injustice that they put on Indigenous peoples.
Would you meet with Mr. Lametti to discuss a way forward, to discuss an option that would maybe, if not a special prosecutor, would maybe be some sort of compromise to give you this accountability and this truth that you're seeking?
As I've said, he has the power to do that. So I expect no less, and I hope that Canadians show that support and express that same frustration and anger and push this Liberal government and Mr. Lametti to do the right thing because he has the power to.
If I may, just one final question before we let you go. You have said you're not going to seek re-election, and you're quite critical of Parliament and the way the House of Commons functions in your farewell speech. We've learned today that Jody Wilson-Raybould will also not seek re-election, and she also spoke to the toxic nature of what has happened in the House of Commons and what has happened in Parliament. What do you think it says about the highest democratic office in our land, the House of Commons, that two prominent Indigenous women have publicly said this is not a place that feels good to them or is comfortable for them? What message does that send?
I think that reflects the reality of Canada on a grand scale, if you will. These examples that Jody and I have faced, Indigenous people face day in, day out, all the time, whether it's discrimination in their job, whether it's being followed around a store simply just trying to do shopping, whether it's trying to access certain services and resources. The things that we have talked about are very big examples of what happens for people all the time, Indigenous peoples all the time on that smaller scale, if you will. But it's just that reality that we face every day in Canada, and the reality of how Canada treats its Indigenous peoples.
Mumilaaq, Qaqqaq, thank you so much for your time today.
Thank you for the space, David. Matna.